to the Wisconsin in Focus podcast powered by the Center Square. I'm Bruce Walker, Midwest Regional Editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Wisconsin in Focus is a production of America's Talking Network. You can find all of the Center Square's great podcasts at americastalking.com. That's americastalking.com. And we ask you to subscribe to Wisconsin in Focus wherever you listen to your podcast. We're recording today on Thursday, February 9th, 2022. And joining me today is our man about town, man about the state, Wisconsin correspondent and gadabout, Benjamin Yount. How are you doing today, Ben?
As long as you don't call me Manitowoc, then we'll be fine. I had to make the manna joke, but
isn't a Manitowoc a hat? Isn't it a hat comprised of cheese?
No, Manitowoc is a lovely little city on the lake. It was made famous by Stephen Avery and the Making a Murderer Netflix documentary. And a couple of years ago, there was all manners of weird murder porn tourists who descended upon Manitowoc, and they were kind of disappointed because they found just a tiny little town nestled on the shores of Lake Michigan and nothing else. There was no sort of drama or action.
There's the car ferry that goes there.
You can always go across to Michigan. I'm sure St. Joe, Michigan, or wherever it lands, Benton Harbor. I'm sure Muskegon. It's just as exciting over there.
Muskegon. So
Muskegon.
Yeah.
There you go. Don't want to besmirch the good name.
Correct.
Of Muskegon, Michigan.
That is right. That is very, very correct. So so if you ever want to escape Wisconsin, and like Kurt Russell as Snake in a John Carpenter film, there's always the ferry from Manitowoc. So
this would be the not having to drive through Chicago would be worth it. We've looked into it, but it's to just take the ferry over. It's not that much, but if you want to bring your car, that it's going to cost you a couple of $100 to get across the lake. So
yeah, but it's a 4-hour ride and it's very relaxing. You can read a book, you can sleep, you can eat, have a cocktail. It's also it's just nice, and you can sit out on the bridge and watch the lake, and it's kind of groovy. I did it last summer coming on my trip back from a fishing trip in Montana. So I found it to be quite pleasant. Thank you very much.
You had me, and you can grab a cocktail. That's pretty much all I need to go in.
I knew it was like, waving red meat in the face of an angry and hungry tiger, a hangry tiger. So let's jump into it, Mr. Ben Yount. You get about you. And one of the stories that you have published within the last 24 hours was something about Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers, who has pitched a plan to remove lawmakers from some conservation decisions. So basically, we're giving you little crumbs leading up to him delivering his entire budget for the 23-24. Well, actually, it's longer than that. You guys do it every 2 years, right?
We do it 2 years. Yeah. This will be the 22 or 23-25 budget.
Okay. Hey, see, I can learn some things.
This is sort of unique.
I can learn some things,
This
Ben.
is unique about Wisconsin is not only that they do 2-year budgets, there are other states that do the biennium, to use the big fancy official word, but during budget years, there aren't a lot of separate bills. And I always hate using the term bill to describe what happens at the Capitol. The bill is what you get from your power company. The bill is what you get from your cable company. But there's not a lot of separate pieces of legislation. The governor sort of rolls this into his budget. And, because there's money being spent, this is how they sort of have this umbrella catch-all. And we've this week, and in fact, we're taping this middle of the day. I would not be surprised if we get another breadcrumb, to borrow the term. But the governor is slow rolling the big pieces of his budget. He's set to deliver the budget speech on Wednesday of next week, and we can get into the procedure afterwards here in a second. But the two big pieces that he has dropped so far, one would be a plan to dedicate 20% of Wisconsin's state sales taxes to local governments, plus allow counties to raise their local sales taxes. And then Wednesday, yesterday, he delivered this plan that would rework how Wisconsin's conservation programs work. We'll flip the order and go with the taxes first. Shared revenue is the term. And we talked about this on the podcast, back in early January when I sort of looked into my crystal ball, played Nostradamus, and looked at what was coming over this spring session. And shared revenue is the big thing. This is the portion of money that state taxes that get sent out to local governments. It's been about $1 billion for a decade or so. And that's the problem. Local governments say, look, man, inflation's up. We need more. We keep going to lawmakers or we keep going to voters for referendum after referendum after referendum. It would be nice if you could increase this. Also comes as Wisconsin has a $7 billion budget surplus. So the governor's proposal early in the week was to share 20%, whatever the 20% number of state sales tax would be, that would be earmarked for local governments. In his plan, that's $576.2 million if you're keeping the scorebook at home. He also proposes to allow counties to raise their own local sales tax. The statewide sales tax is 5%, and then counties usually are about at 0.5%. If that, under his plan, all counties would go to at least 1%. Milwaukee County would get special dispensation to go to 1.5%. They would be able to add a full percent to their local sales tax, but they would have to share half that money with the city of Milwaukee. This is all because Milwaukee did not have its employees pay into its pension plan for decades. Pre-Scott Walker, you didn't pay if you were a city of Milwaukee employee. Your pension, your health care, all of those other benefits were essentially free. Taxpayers picked up the cost. But as we have seen with the Ponzi scheme of defined benefit public pension plans, eventually that bill comes due, and that bill is coming due in Milwaukee here at the end of this year and the beginning of next year. Now, Milwaukee has used its federal coronavirus money to get over the hump, but that money runs out in 24. Milwaukee's going to need at least another $50 to $60 million just to make the pension payment, and it's money they don't have. So that's where the Milwaukee component of this is. Now, we've heard from both Assembly Speaker Robin Vos and Senate Majority Leader Devin LeMahieu, who are the top Republicans in the legislature. They'll control the budget process. Both of them have said they are open to the idea of possibly sharing more state revenue with local governments. LeMahieu framed it as an inflation issue, and that if it's just too costly for cities, for towns, for municipalities to hire cops and firefighters, he wants to help them do that. Vos has said, let's have a bargain. Milwaukee, if you give us reforms, privatize, if you make some spending cuts, if you get your pension problems under control, perhaps join the state pension system, then we can talk about sending more money. The governor's plan is so far beyond any of those two concepts, particularly the idea of sending more state money and allowing counties to raise their own taxes, because as you probably know, allowing isn't all but guaranteeing that it is going to happen. If you allow Milwaukee to raise its sales tax by up to 1%, it will instantly raise its sales tax by up to 1%. So that's the tax portion of the governor's breadcrumbs. The story that you talked about that we filed just yesterday is that he wants to remove legislative oversight from many of the state's conservation programs. And Wisconsin has a very robust program where the state buys land so that it can never be developed, takes it off the market, make sure that it if there's any work at all, it's forest management, but it doesn't open it up to loggers, to lumber companies, to private developers, to people who really just want to go and buy a home in a cabin in the North Woods. And during the Walker administration, the Republican majority, and then Governor Scott Walker, who was Republican himself, issued in a whole wave of oversight. And the governor wants to say, okay, anything that's north of Highway 64, which is Rhinelander area, think of it like the wall in Game of Thrones. Highway 64 is essentially, the edge of beyond that, it's the Northwoods. Beyond that, it's the wildlings, it's the giants, and the huge ice spiders.
There be dragons.
Right now, lawmakers have some sort of oversight over all the projects north of 64. The governor wants to end that. He wants to double, essentially, his free spending on conservation without any legislative oversight. Right now, if the governor wants to do a conservation project under $250,000, $250, lawmakers really can't do anything. The governor wants to double that to $500,000. The governor also wants to end the anonymous objections to conservation projects. Right now, all a lawmaker has to do is come in and say, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. I don't think that that's a good idea for our area. And then, well, it stops. The governor wants to publicly name those lawmakers so that, in this age of protests and Twitter, you know what happens next. But this is in a broader sense, this is the first sign that this is the old Tony Evers. During his first 4 years in office, there was 100% of zero cooperation between the governor and the Republican-controlled legislature. At times, it was very adversarial. To borrow the line from the great ESPN 30 for 30 on the University of Miami, the governor essentially governed with both of his middle fingers extended to the legislature. There was hope after his reelection that maybe there could be some cooperation, maybe that this governor was open to co-governing. After all, the legislature is a co-equal branch. This was, the excitement of, well, maybe there could be something done with shared revenue. Oh, the Senate's going to vote on some of the governor's nominees. Okay, we're starting to get back to how government should work. And the second biggest proposal that the governor makes in his budget would be to chop lawmakers out of day-to-day decisions that he wants to make on his own. And unfortunately, that's not how it works. So this is one of these things that I think you can bet is not going to be in the Republican plan, but it is telling. And that brings, to the final sort of bullet point here as we talk about the slow drip of the budget. The governor in Wisconsin can propose whatever he wants. And we saw this with his first two budgets during his first 4 years, that he'll propose all manners of things, an expansion of Medicaid. He'll propose legalized marijuana. He'll propose spending millions, if not billions more on public schools. And he'll propose all manners of smaller specific things like this. And then the very powerful, Joint Finance Committee will get together, and it's controlled by Republicans, and it will write the legislature's budget.
Okay, so
it will be a vastly different document.
The Joint Finance Committee is overseeing legalization of marijuana?
Well, the Joint Finance Committee oversees the budget.
And
the
okay.
budget
all right. I think that went over your head. I think when I lost you at
the Joint
Booze
Finance Committee.
Okay,
got it.
Right.
You got to hit the Joint Finance Committee. Look, they played this game. I think it was last year. Yeah, I think it was last year where they scheduled a hearing, the first sort of substantive hearing on legal marijuana. They scheduled it on April 20th, 4/20. And so, I'm a square. I don't get the I don't get the devil's lettuce references.
I've owned a couple of Cheech and Chong albums through the years. So, and I interviewed Tommy Chong. So that was kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah, that would be an interesting interview. But this is all by way of saying that the governor on Wednesday of next week is going to come and he's going to give his speech and he's going to say, let's go, folks, and we can do this, and Wisconsin forward. And then the Republicans who control the legislature will get down to the real work. And the interesting part is that the governor of the state of Wisconsin is either going to sign this budget or he's not. The way that it works with most legislation is if the governor doesn't veto it, it's just assumed that he's cool with it and it goes into effect. The governor has a very, 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 very powerful line item veto pen that he can literally cross out words. He can erase commas. So he can have some say in just what the budget is, but he doesn't get to spend money that he's not given. He doesn't get to create laws without the help of the legislature. He doesn't get to change state statutes. So there is a bit of a dance as the Republicans write their own budget. And the first budget that Republicans sent to the governor, he wasn't very happy with it, but he ultimately signed it. The second budget, the budget from 2 years ago, heading into the election season, the governor signed that almost immediately, even though he did not want a tax cut. He proposed $1 billion in new taxes, and he proposed, I think, $6 billion in new spending. And so when the Republicans gave him a budget that had a tax cut, he happily signed it because he was then able to go and run for reelection on, hey, look, I signed a budget that cuts your taxes. There is no election, at least not for 4 years here in Wisconsin. So again, there's a little bit of wait and see as to we have our expectations, but we don't know exactly how it's going to work out.
Well, let me ask you this as a sidebar. Will the governor, is he eligible to run for reelection, or is he term limited out?
No, he can run for reelection. And based on sort of the demographics, he very well could win. Scott Walker ran for a third term and he lost. And 3 terms is a lot. 3 terms is a big ask. I'm pretty sure that Tony Evers' pension is secure, so I don't think that he has to worry too much about that. You're already seeing some maneuvering and who's next up. But you could be governor for, like, Tommy Thompson was elected 4 times, I want to say. The only reason he stopped being governor is that he went to work for the Bush administration, the second Bush administration. And then after that, he became, governor emeritus, ran the University of Wisconsin system, saved the University of Wisconsin system from itself. But that's a podcast for another day.
Okay. Well, and Tony Evers, again, I'm from Michigan, so you'll have to kind of give me the remedial course in Wisconsin politics. Mr. Evers was the state school superintendent.
Mm-hmm. That's an elected position. Yep, he was state superintendent. Before that, he worked for the Department of Public Instruction. He was a bureaucrat there. And before that, he was a school administrator. Tony Evers has spent most of his career in education. And this becomes, if we ever talk with our friends from the Institute for Reforming Government or the MacGyver Institute, they will be very quick to say this is a guy who's dedicated his entire career to education. If there's one thing in Wisconsin that should be taken care of, if there's one thing that this governor would be really good at, it would be education. But yet every measure of public schools during Tony Evers' time as governor, during his time as state superintendent, they are all down and trending down. And if you look at schools in Milwaukee and Madison, the biggest communities in the state, they're even worse. Graduation rate in Milwaukee public schools is 60-something%, and that's going down. 2/3 of kids in the state can't read or write at grade level. You're seeing fewer and fewer kids take and pass the ACT or SAT. So, yeah, this is and we fully expect the governor to ask for another $1 billion or $2 billion for public schools. He's going to stand up on the podium, behind the podium, and he's going to say the way to bring our kids back from whatever they may have lost during the coronavirus is to have smaller class sizes, to redouble the effort to work on reading, to work on writing, to work on math. And to do that, I'm going to need X number of dollars. Now, Republicans in the Wisconsin Capitol will tell you that they have steadily supported education. In fact, last year, because of the coronavirus money, schools in Wisconsin saw more money than they have ever seen in a single year. And yet the results have not transferred to kids in the classroom. And so that's the debate. And this brings in the wonderful conversation about school choice and where we go from there. And yeah, you read the site. You see the stories, Bruce. You get them when they come in the email.
I do. And you almost walked all over my segue there because I thought I was being kind of clever in tying all of this together with a story you wrote on new legislation, again, looks to strengthen parental rights in Wisconsin classrooms. So on top of intense learning loss through the pandemic, there's also parents who are somewhat up in arms over some of the materials that are being taught in Wisconsin classrooms. Well, classrooms across the United States. But for the purposes of this conversation, we'll just focus on Wisconsin. Take it away, Ben.
You have 2 general objections from moms and dads. One, kids aren't really learning enough. Test scores are down. Grades aren't what they used to be. this was sort of exposed, I think is the best word to use, during the time that kids were sent home in the spring of 2020. Now, some schools kept kids home fall of 2021 as well, but parents, for the first time, saw what their children actually were learning, or more to the point, weren't learning. And that bothered a lot of parents, particularly a lot of suburban parents who want to know why their kids aren't learning the same things that they learned as parents. When we were in school, 20, 30 years ago, you also have the other half of this equation. So you've got grades on one hand, and then the other hand, you have what comes down to essentially an argument over dirty books. And you have a lot of parents who are unhappy with new curriculum on, sexual health and wellness, or just plain health and wellness, that talks about sex and gender and sometimes uses graphic learning materials. There is a story at least once every other week about a school or a town that finds a book it doesn't like in the library, and there's a whole kerfuffle over whether or not to pull it. And LGBTQ plus IA advocates show up and say that you are harming LGBTQ plus IA children. And this plan from Andre Jacques, who's a Republican senator up De Pere is where he's from, but it's the Green Bay area, sort of that the V between Door County and the path to the Northwoods. And he's saying, one, what we want to do is we want to make sure that libraries, all school libraries, plus all public libraries in the state, don't let kids look at harmful material. Two, he's starting to reintroduce some of the proposals, the plans, the specifics of the Parental Bill of Rights. That passed with overwhelming support in the legislature last year, and then Governor Evers vetoed it. The governor vetoed it because he said that he didn't want parents nitpicking at what or how teachers taught. But the Parental Bill of Rights is essentially the sweeping reform that makes schools publish what they're teaching. Share with mom and dad the list of books, share with mom and dad the handouts, share with mom and dad what the assignments actually are. You no longer get to say, well, this is sixth grade health class. Oh, okay. All right. Well, what are we talking about in sixth grade health class? That's what the Parental Bill of Rights would force the conversation to be. This is doomed, even though this will likely gain a lot of support in the legislature, and it very well may pass again. Not 100% sure if Jacques' bill in and of itself will pass. There are probably going to be other versions of this. But this is one of these proposals that with divided government, it's not going to happen. We saw this so many times during the session back in 2022, where Republicans would propose all manners of things and the governor would simply turn it down, promise a veto, and then come through with a veto. And while this is as Jacques told me earlier in the week, he said this came from parents. This came from constituents. Constituents came and said, look, this is what our kids can find in the library. This shouldn't happen. The governor is going to once again find his reasoning for it, and he is certain to veto this. But it shows that the conversation, to borrow the talk radio term, the frustration, the anger, the interest, the focus, whatever word you want to use on just what kids are learning and just what schools and local libraries are providing them, that's not going away, and it's not going to go away with or without a governor's veto.
Well, Ben, I think that's about all the time we have for today, but thank you for all of your contributions. Thank you for your stories, your wonderful legwork, and your gadabout nature for picking up all of these stories and reporting on them so thoroughly and explaining the background to all of them. I do appreciate it very much.
Appreciate it. No worries. It's what I'm here for.
That's what we pay you the big bucks for.
I didn't want to say it like that. I don't want to say, yeah, that's why you pay me. You know, this ain't a volunteer thing. Maybe one day the Red Cross will start writing state capitol news, but till then, it's a business, baby.
Artificial intelligence, baby. Our days are numbered.
God.
Our days are numbered.
Oh God, you're right. We're all, dude. We're haberdashers and travel agents, man. We're doomed.
Absolutely. Wisconsin in Focus is powered by the Center Square and is a production of America's Talking Network. You can find all of the Center Square's great podcast at americastalking.com. That's americastalking.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, we ask you to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor of the Center Square Newswire Service. And listen for another episode of Wisconsin in Focus with Benjamin Yount and myself next week.